Sigma is a company we all know for their amazing lenses. And aside from the new logo they just released, they just announced a few new products. One of the products I want to talk about in today's video is their new announcement of the Sigma BF camera, which is set to be released in April of 2025. And on today's video, I kind of want to talk about why I'm probably one of the few that are not really excited about this camera. When I first saw the announcement on Instagram, I thought, this is, could be a really cool camera. But then once I learned more about it and its specs, I was like, well, this is probably not all it's cracked up to be. And so I'm just gonna go through the pros and cons and kind of the specs that they already announced and stuff that I know, and just give my personal opinion on the camera. So this new BF camera is going to be available in silver and black, and it looks to me kind of similar in shape to the Fuji X100 series, like the Fuji X100V and X106. And it's made out of a solid block of aluminum, I think, or titanium. I'm pretty sure it's aluminum, and it's 388 grams, so it's a fairly light camera. And so some of the things that I like about it, I have a list here, I'm gonna read them off. It's a full frame camera, 24 megapixels, records 6K video, records and log, up to 120 frames per second. It has 230 gigabytes of internal memory, so you won't use SD cards with this camera. It can store up to 14,000 JPEG images or 4,300 raw images, and you can get up to, or probably a little bit more than 2.5 hours of video. Now, you probably just heard me read off those specs and you're like, what are you talking about, camera? Like, this is an amazing camera. Look at all the specs. Look at all it's doing. It's full frame, 24 megapixels, records in 6K. And like, all that stuff is great. I'm not saying it's not. Like, that's kind of what you want in a modern day camera. But when I look at the cons of this camera, I'm like, it kind of thwarts everything that I really think about this camera. And so when I read through my cons list, Sigma kind of portrays this, or is advertising this, to be a photo-centric camera. Okay, so they said it's great for photographers. But when I read the specs, you would probably think it's a video camera, because that's honestly what I feel like it's kind of tailored towards. So in my mind, how can it be a photo-centric camera when there is no EVF and there's no articulating screen and there's no mechanical shutter, only electronic shutter? And also, you would think that in this small of a camera, being 388 grams, that you can probably throw a 16 millimeter on it, or a 10 or a 20, and kind of vlog with it and just be kind of like your everyday camera or whatever. But there's no mic port for audio, and since you don't have an articulating screen, you can't really vlog with it because you can't see what you're recording. On top of that, and this just might be my personal qualm, that it's only for L mount. So I think this camera was honestly released and really tailored for people with money. I think when you release a camera like this and you want it to be more inclusive of everyone, you probably release it with a standard mount, probably like an E mount. But I feel like an L mount is so specific to where if you own a Leica or something high dollar like that, then you can own this camera. But it's like, not everybody's shooting on Leica, not everybody's shooting on L mount. I feel like a more versatile mount would be the E, because that's what we see a lot of. Now, that's just my personal opinion. I'm not saying that I'm objectively right in this instance, but that's just kind of what I feel. And so after I name off all these specs, you're probably thinking, okay, what's the price? It's probably going to be around, $1,200, maybe $1,400. It's a $2,000 camera for the body alone. I think for what they're advertising it as is a photocentric camera, and not having the EVF, not having an articulating screen, and it being, honestly, in my opinion, a video-centric camera. Because in my opinion, if you want a photocentric camera, you will put in there a mechanical shutter and an electronic shutter. You will put in there an EVF. You'll put in there an articulating screen, because imagine trying to get a low shot and you have no articulating screen. That's going to be so hard to do. Or if you're trying to get a vertical and at like waist height, you would like the articulating screen to kind of pop out so you can see what you're doing, instead of having to really struggle trying to get down low and saying, okay, let me try and see my screen like this. And I don't know the nits or the brightness of this LCD screen, but I can only imagine that the struggle that you will go through with not having any HDMI ports, not having any mic ports, so you can't have a monitor on it or anything like that if you're doing video. So I can only imagine the struggle you're going to go through when recording video or taking pictures, depending on the screen brightness. Like I said, I don't know how bright the screen gets, and I don't know how well it's going to combat the sun if you're shooting outside on a sunny day, but I can just see a lot of problems with this camera. I can see a lot of people getting their hands on this camera really excited and then saying, okay, well, this is not what I thought it was going to be, and they just return it or they just don't buy it to begin with. And I'm gonna back up just a little bit. You're probably saying, well, if there's no SD cards on this camera and there's internal storage, how are you supposed to get that information off? There is a single USB-C port which you will plug in and get all your information off onto an SSD or your internal computer storage that way. But I think that will run into some problems too. If that USB-C port gets cooked, you're cooked. Like, there's really no way around it. That's going to be so much money trying to fix that one port versus if you were able to use an SD card or dual slot or whatever. If the SD card is corrupted, you just put in a new SD card. And I just think that with this camera, it's more potential for problems than there is for success and enjoyment. Like, when I go through the pros and I look at the 24 megapixel sensor, and I look at the 6K, and look at the log, the L log, and I look at the 120 frames per second, like, this will be cool camera with the specs wise, but it definitely is not a professional camera. Like, I wouldn't take it to a wedding, or I wouldn't take it to any type of corporate work, because, like, even though you have these specs, there's just stuff that you need, in my opinion, when you're doing this high dollar work that this camera just doesn't have. And I think for honestly, if you let me call it a hobbyist camera, $2,000 is kind of a crazy price point. And to me, this is kind of one of those things where if you are an Apple user, I'm an Apple user, like I got an iPhone right here. I know I drank the Kool-Aid and everything, whatever. But it's one of those things where if you paid attention to the MacBook Pros, and it used to have all these ports, it used to have an HDMI port, used to have an SD card port, used to have a USB-C port, then you had a charging port. It had all these ports. And then as technology got newer, they took those ports away and made you buy adapters. And it just feels like this is one of those things where they're kind of putting something out there because they feel like it's going to sell, but it's not a great use case scenario for a lot of things. And I think a lot of people are going to realize that once they get their hands on it and they actually start using it. And they're going to be like, well, this is cool, but, you know, I don't know if it's for me. And they tailor, if I'm not mistaken, they kind of market this camera to like the beginner photographers because the layout on the back, it has a scroll wheel and just 3 buttons, so it's easy to go through the menu and find everything you need. But at the same time, that's another reason why it wouldn't be good for professional work, because there's no shutter dial, no aperture dial. You have to physically go through the scroll wheel to get to each one of these things. So if you're trying to do a wedding or professional work and shooting a manual, you have to go literally through the menu, go to the shutter speed, change that, and then go to the aperture, change that, then go to the ISO and change that. By that time, the moment is gone. So I don't know if this is good for like street photography or what. I honestly just don't see the use case for this camera. But the specs are cool. So I think if you're doing video, I think it's a little easier to do video than it is photography. But I think to market this as a photo-centric camera is a big miss. And I think this is definitely more of a video camera than anything. But these are just my opinions. If you want to use it for yourself and let me know, or let me know down in the comments what you think about this camera, go right ahead. I'm not saying I'm objectively correct in this. I'm just giving my opinion on this announcement because I do like Sigma. I use a Sigma lenses. I'm using a Sigma right now, the 24-70 Art. And so I do like Sigma as a company. I do like what they produce, but I just feel like with this camera, I just don't see the point. Honestly, I just don't see the point. But anyway, that's it for today's video. Like and subscribe to the channel. Leave a comment down in the description below if you have any thoughts about this Sigma BF camera. Research it for yourself. Like I said, it's coming out April 2025. And if you do get your hands on it, you know, let me know. So yeah, with that being said, I'm gonna holler at y'all next time. Peace.